any other major religion, and ask them whether within the framework of the metaphysics this statement is justifiable. It isn't. Which means the framers of the soul of this nation believed that there was something so incontrovertibly undeniable, included in which was the sacredness of your life, your liberty, and your right to pursue the happy life for you and your family. Essence, existence, conscience. This is so profound, and leaders sometimes fail to even come to terms with that one step. We're removing the fences? Are we pulling down the pillars? Are we saying to ourselves that we no longer abide by that self-evident truth? If we do, we're removing a very serious fence. The next thing that happens is it'll accelerate the development of all kinds of aberrant and destructive views. That was the second thing that happened. You see, nature abhors a vacuum. If you evict the truth, you don't live in neutrality. Some other ideology comes and storms in there. You know, I had a professor from China visiting me recently, one of the leading universities. We're going to do some lectureships there. He said one of the leading members of the Communist Party in Beijing sat across the table, leaned forward and said this to him: after all of your criticism about communism, you have to say one thing about what we did. We've done you a great favor, he said, because we left the heart of our people empty. He said it was waiting for something to take over, and we have done you Christians a favor, said he. And this professor of linguistics said, I just sat across the table and thought, is this a trap? Why is it today the church in China is the fastest growing church in the world? In the 60s, Mao Zedong said Christianity would never return there. It was gone permanently. Today I could go to any one of those leading universities and you'll find the tables surrounded with people peering over each other's shoulders to listen to every word of what you're saying. Ladies and gentlemen, God gave us in this land the privilege of the propagation of the gospel. And when you take that fence away, all kinds of aberrant views come that ultimately so deify man and humanize God that we can scarcely tell the difference. For one, he removed the truth. Number two, aberrant views came in. Number three, what was the third solution to appease his conscience? It was nothing more than to persecute the prophets. Nothing more than to persecute the prophets. Isn't it interesting that the man who proclaimed the coming of the Messiah, Isaiah, was a prophet at the time of Manasseh? And the book of Hebrews talks about those who were sawn asunder. Isaiah was sawn asunder. He had fled and had hid inside the trunk of a tree to run away from the sword of Manasseh who was hunting him down. That tree was cut down. The extra biblical material is right. We do know that there's enough support that he died a martyr's death for his talking about the coming of the Messiah. And so the persecution begins in very subtle ways. People often ask me, if there's one thing you could change in this land, what would it be? I would just want the gospel to be presentable in the academy on equal footing. So, give us the freedom to defend why we are followers of Jesus Christ. Just give us that freedom. Why is it, if the Dalai Lama comes and speaks, and wonderful, then they want to hear him, that's fine. Why is it if some great guru comes from India, they want to hear him speak, and that's fine, that's a privilege in a pluralistic society. But why then, if a Christian wants to present his or her defense of the Christian faith, does some professor afterwards stand up there and lacerate the talk, word by word? That's not equal footing. Give the ideas that shape this culture a place in the marketplace to be able to be presented a defense thereof. That's it. Because you know, the more Christ is presented in his splendor and truth, the more beautiful he ultimately will be, as men and women will see this tremendous distinctive of who he is and what he taught. I had the privilege 2 weeks ago in India to be speaking to members of Parliament, and the next night to members of the Bollywood Film Actors Guild and so on. Fascinating time. One in the bastions of power, the other in the bastions of entertainment. And it is fascinating to me, born and raised in India, where my father was a high-placed government officer in the Home Ministry, as we call it then, which you all refer to as the State Department. And to see people in such powerful positions looking for answers from Jesus. It's a new day there. It's a new day in these places. The masses just throng and come. So I leave you with these three truths that he did, in decisions that he made. To lead a reaction against his father's reformation, be careful what fence you pull up. When you do that, it allows a place for all kinds of aberrant views. The third thing he did was start a bit of persecution of the prophet. That's what he did. What are the entailments of decisions like that? Number one, it is this. It is possible for one person to lead millions into untold evil. I know that's one side of a coin, I'll come to the other side of the coin later. But it is possible for one person to lead millions into untold evil. Most of the world never took Hitler seriously. Even less did most of the world take Joseph Stalin seriously. If you read the media reports of Stalin, you would have thought the new Messiah had arrived. But Malcolm Muggeridge, the English journalist, wrote his book on Stalin and said there's something very sinister in this mind. He was ostracized by the media world for seeing through what Stalin was really about. Svetlana Stalin, Joseph Stalin's daughter, was by his bedside when Stalin was dying, and she told Malcolm Muggeridge this, who personally told me this, since being justified and notated by historians like Paul Johnson, because she said it the next time on the BBC. She told Muggeridge, she said this to him, Muggeridge, who I think was the greatest British journalist of the 20th century, certainly one of the greatest ones. He told me this in his home. He said, as you know, Stalin was once upon a time a seminary student, going into the ministry, renounced his faith in God, went into political power, and clenched his fist as God to a point where he obliterated about 15 million of his own people. He said, Mr. Zacharias, while he was lying in bed dying, his immediate family members standing around, Svetlana told me this, that he began to hallucinate. He was losing it. She said, but the last thing he did, she said, my father sat up half in bed, clenched his fist at the heavens one more time, head back on the pillow, and he was gone. When I had the privilege of addressing officers at the Lenin Military Academy during the days of the Cold War, I was the first theist to be speaking to them at the invitation of the general. Heard me some other place, and so it was a very strenuous time. But they were giving me the choke sign while I was speaking the whole time. My wife didn't know how I endured that for 45 minutes. And after that, they took me over to the Center for Geopolitical Strategy in Moscow. And 4 stories above ground, 8 stories below ground, all of their luminaries, pictures on the walls. And seated before all of their faculty for about 2 hours, 3 hours, I was given a grilling on theism vis-a-vis atheism. At the end of that talk, the man says to me, the head of the department, I promise you these were his exact words, and I quote him. My wife was standing beside me. He leaned over, grabbed my hand, and he said, Dr. Zacharias, thank you for coming. What you have said to us today I believe to be true, but it is very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie. Very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie. You see, one person can lead millions to untold evil. And the second reason is this, because most people don't know how to think anymore. One of the things you're so grateful for